start standing on your mat with all 10 toes facing the same direction. Let's first check to make sure the spacing between the feet is correct. This is something that every teacher feels a little differently about. I feel very strongly that you should try to imagine how long one of your legs is and try to put that space between your feet. The reason being is because of how the hip and the knees work. I used to teach for people to go wider. I used to teach a very wide warrior. And then I realized you can't really push into your feet very well if your feet are wide. So if you stand with your feet about the distance of one of your legs' length, you can push into your feet pretty well. If you lift up your toes, spread them, and then push down, push from big toe to outer blade and then pinky toe to inner blade. How do your feet feel in straddle so far, and your legs? What changes?
Like my weights and my toes more.
Yeah, weights and toes more. It's not just all resting in the heels.
And my knees more active.
Knees more active.
I feel like
Hips, yes. Hip stabilizers will kick in if your feet are actively pressing. Yes, no one, not a single person in this room is like standing with their knees locked and their hips back. Every single person, their joints are in a straight line and their weight is centered. So now, since everyone's facing the left, let's turn the right toes forward, but keep your hips facing that edge. And now just turn your left heel back a little bit. Now let's do the same thing. Lift your toes, spread them, push back down, press from big toe to outer blade, pinky toe to inner blade. Now bend your right knee. How's it feel? Solid. Good. Any pinching anywhere? Or anything of that nature? Great. For a second I was like, either everyone's quiet because they're getting pinched somewhere or... Perfect. Okay. Let's do the same thing on the other side. So come back to center and then just turn your left toes to the back of your mat. Push your right heel back a little bit. Lift the toes. Push from big toe to outer blade, pinky toe to inner blade. That's a really quick thing you can do every time you go to this pose. Pick up your toes and repress through your feet. Takes like a second. And then bend through your left knee if you haven't already. Is it easier for your knee to track toward the second or third toe now instead of go to the big toe? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So now if you keep pushing through your feet like this, what if you lengthen your leg and bend your knee a few times? Does it feel like your knee has a hard time tracking, or does it go in the same direction the whole time?
It's right there.
Good. Now I want you to just try to switch back and forth between your feet a few times. And feel how easy it is to quickly adjust the feet through Pada Bandha. So your front toes are always going to be turned forward, like 12 o'clock. Your back toes, I don't even like to really talk about where the toes are. I really prefer to talk about where the heel is. I just want your heel slightly back. Depending on your build, your heel might be back a little bit more than someone else's. And I don't like to give a specific measurement because everyone's body is different. So does it feel is all I see when I see a huge long warrior is people just tearing their knees up. Also, the most common hip injury, especially for women, but in yoga in general, is overuse of the hips by going too deep into postures like that. Because if you're that deep in a pose, you're not going to be able to hold yourself up muscularly anymore. What you're starting to find is the pelvis is resting on the femur bone. So your acetabulum is the hip socket, your head of the femur bone would go into that, and there's supposed to be space. But if your stance is too wide, what we find is this, the femur bone and the acetabulum pushing into each other. And then what happens over time is those bones run into each other so much that the fluid that's supposed to be there, leaving space, gets pressed out, the fat gets pressed out, and then you end up sharding the bones. You get bone shards. Yeah, and then they have to go in and shave that off. Yeah. So, or you get new hips. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it is just really not understanding the function of the hip. What is normal range of motion? Once I really dug into anatomy, because I'm someone that's hypermobile and I practiced all of my postures very big, grand, deeply, because it looked like the cover of Yoga Journal. And what I started to notice was how much pain I was getting in my hips, how that pain was starting to transfer into my back, and how my legs were falling asleep all of the time. And once I started to really understand the function of the hip, what is normal range of motion, it's being taught to go beyond normal range of motion in most classes because it just isn't understood. So it's really important to understand your warrior is going to be stronger up higher than it will be down lower.
And I was going to mention that because I always hear the instruction to push through your feet.
Yeah.
And I usually I only feel like I'm pushing through like a corner, one of the corners of my foot.
Mm-hmm.
No, like the front part of my back foot.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. A lot of the time it's just the feet are too wide. Yeah.
I think the big aha here for me is you always hear find your edge.
Yeah.
Well, and if you have too much flexibility already, your edge is gross. I mean, it's
Exactly.
like, woo! And
Yeah.
it's like, I don't need to find my edge, I need to find the middle of the muscle, like what you said before.
Yeah.
Which feels completely different.
It does. Yeah. Because
And stronger.
let's sit down and talk about that for a moment, and then give your hips and feet a break for a second, and we'll go back to that in a moment. I knew we would spend a lot of time with this today because it's going to translate to every other standing posture you do. Let's talk about finding your edge, because I think this is an important topic. I stopped saying that to people because, again, that was one thing personally that pushed me to injury over and over and over again. Because if you're constantly finding your edge, what you're doing is you're building an incredible pain tolerance. And you're like, no, I'm not in pain, I'm just really uncomfortable. No, I'm not in pain, I'm just really uncomfortable. And then you get to the point where you're like, I don't really know the difference between being uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, and being in a little bit of pain anymore. And if you don't understand the function of a joint, it is so easy to go beyond range of motion.